The worst nights always begin with someone knocking at the door after midnight. Rain slammed against the apartment windows hard enough to rattle the loose glass in the frame, while thunder rolled over Brooklyn like something angry and alive. I tightened my coat around myself and hurried up the narrow stairwell to the third floor, my sneakers squeaking against cracked linoleum as exhaustion dragged at every step. My shift at Rosie's Diner had ended almost an hour ago, but Mrs. Delgado had asked me to stay late again because her son was sick, and I needed the extra money too badly to say no. The smell of burnt coffee and fryer grease still clung to my clothes as I reached our apartment door. That's when I noticed the hallway was silent. Too silent. Usually, our neighbors fought loud enough to shake the walls. TVs blasted through paper-thin drywall. Somebody's dog barked nonstop. But tonight, nothing. Just rain. Just thunder. Just the strange feeling crawling up the back of my neck. I slid my key into the lock carefully and stepped inside. The first thing I saw was my father sitting at the kitchen table with both hands wrapped around a whiskey glass. The second thing I noticed was that he looked terrified. Not drunk. Terrified. His face had gone pale beneath the yellow kitchen light, and sweat glistened along his forehead despite the cold creeping through the apartment windows. "Dad." I closed the door slowly behind me. "What happened?" He looked at me like he hadn't expected me to come home. Like he'd been praying I wouldn't. "Claire," he said quietly, his voice rough and uneven. "You need to pack a bag." My stomach tightened instantly. "What?" "Just do it." He stood too quickly, knocking the chair backward into the wall. "Take cash if you have any. Go stay with Mia in Queens for a few days." "Dad, what are you talking about?" He opened his mouth to answer, but the sound of tires splashing through rainwater outside interrupted him. Headlights swept across the apartment walls through the blinds. Bright white beams cutting through darkness. My father froze. Completely froze. Then came the sound. A car door opening downstairs. Followed by another. And another. Heavy. Footsteps echoed through the hallway outside the apartment building. Slow. Controlled. Deliberate. Not cops. Worse. My father grabbed my wrist so suddenly I flinched. "Listen to me carefully," he whispered. "Do not open that door no matter what happens." My pulse started pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. "Who's coming?" He looked toward the hallway like he already knew the answer. Then somebody knocked. 3 slow knocks. Calm. Patient. Somehow that frightened me more than yelling would have. The apartment seemed to shrink around me. Rain hammered outside. Thunder cracked overhead. And my father looked like a man standing at the edge of a cliff. Another knock came. This time louder. "Marcus Bennett." A deep voice called through the door. Smooth. Controlled. Dangerous in a way that didn't need volume. "We need to talk." My father's grip tightened painfully around my wrist. "Claire," he whispered shakily. "Go to your room." But before I could move, the hallway light outside shifted beneath the crack under our door. Shadows moved across it. More than one person. My heartbeat stumbled when I realized they weren't leaving. They were waiting. Then the voice spoke again. Calm as winter. "You're out of time." My father looked like he could barely breathe. His fingers trembled against my wrist while the rain battered the windows hard enough to make the apartment feel like it was floating in dark water. Another knock echoed through the room. Slow. Controlled. Patient. Whoever stood outside knew we were not going anywhere. "Dad?" I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady. "Who was that?" He swallowed hard, eyes fixed on the door like it might explode inward at any second. "A mistake I made a long time ago." The man outside spoke again before I could ask another question. "Marcus, I do not enjoy waiting." The voice was calm, but something underneath it made my stomach tighten. Not anger. Worse. Certainty. My father finally released my wrist and ran both hands over his face. He suddenly looked 20 years older than he had an hour ago. "Claire, listen to me carefully. Do not say anything unless they speak to you directly." "They?" The lock clicked before he could answer. My breath caught instantly. The door opened slowly, almost politely, and 3 men stepped inside like they already owned the apartment. Dark coats damp from the rain. Expensive shoes against our cracked hardwood floor. None of them looked around with curiosity. Men like this had probably seen 100 apartments like ours. Small. Tired. Barely surviving. The first man was massive, broad shoulders stretching beneath a charcoal overcoat. The second looked younger, clean-cut, sharp eyes scanning every corner of the room with cold precision. But it was the third man who made the air change. He entered last. Calmly. like the room adjusted itself around him the second he walked in. Tall, dark hair brushed neatly away from his face. Black wool coat fitted perfectly over a gray suit that probably cost more than our yearly rent. Rainwater glistened briefly along his shoulders before one of the other men stepped forward to take the coat from him. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Even Thunder seemed quieter when he looked around the apartment. Then his eyes landed on my father. "Marcus Bennett," he said softly. "You disappeared." My father straightened slightly, trying to recover some dignity. "I needed more time. You were given 6 months. The man removed black leather gloves one finger at a time, movements slow and precise. "Most people are grateful when I am patient." I should have looked away. Every instinct told me to stay invisible, but I could not stop staring at him. He did not look like the criminals from movies or news reports. No yelling, no reckless rage. Damien Moretti looked controlled in a way that felt far more dangerous. Like he never needed to raise his voice because the room already belonged to him. His attention shifted suddenly, toward me, and for one strange second, everything stopped. I felt it physically. The silence, the stillness, the way his expression changed almost too quickly to notice. His eyes narrowed slightly, not with suspicion, but recognition. Like he had seen something impossible. I swallowed hard beneath the weight of that stare. The kitchen light flickered softly overhead, while rain rolled down the windows behind me in silver streams. Nobody spoke, not even the men beside him. Damien stared at me long enough to make my pulse stumble. Then his gaze dropped slowly to the silver necklace resting against my sweater. A tiny snowflake pendant my mother gave me before she died. The color drained from his face so subtly I almost thought I imagined it. "Where did you get that necklace?" he asked quietly. My father made a sound under his breath. Fear. Real fear. But I could not answer right away because something in Damien Moretti's voice had changed. The cold control was still there, but underneath it now lived something else entirely. Something unsettled. The entire apartment felt colder after he asked about the necklace. Nobody moved. Nobody even seemed to breathe. Rain slid down the windows behind me while the old kitchen clock ticked loud enough to sound unnatural in the silence. I wrapped my fingers instinctively around the silver pendant resting against my chest. "It was my mother's," I said carefully. Damien Moretti's eyes never left mine. Dark, focused, unreadable. But something in his face had shifted the second I mentioned my mother. Not softer. Men like him probably did not know how to soften. Just distant for a moment. Like he had stepped somewhere far away inside his own mind. My father suddenly cleared his throat. "Claire, go to your room." "No," the answer left my mouth before I could stop it. Every head turned toward me instantly, including the 2 men beside Damien. I should have been terrified. Maybe I was. But exhaustion and fear had twisted together into something sharp inside my chest. "I want to know what is happening," I said, trying to steady my voice. "Why are these people here?" My father looked ready to collapse. Damien, however, watched me with quiet interest, like he was studying something unexpected. "Your father owes me money," he said calmly. "A great deal of money." I laughed once under my breath before I could help it. Not because anything was funny, because it felt impossible. We could barely afford groceries some weeks. The idea of my father owing serious money sounded insane. "How much?" I asked. My father shut his eyes. Damien answered anyway. $1.8 million. The number hit me so hard I thought I misheard it. "What?" "Claire," my father whispered weakly. "Dad, that is not possible." It became possible when he signed contracts he could not repay. Damien's voice stayed level, controlled. "Your father borrowed money for business investments 6 years ago, then again 2 years later, then again after that." Shame flooded my father's face. "I was trying to fix things." "You gambled on bad deals," Damien corrected quietly. "And now here we are." Thunder cracked overhead so loudly the apartment lights flickered. I stared at my father, trying to reconcile the man who forgot utility bills with somebody involved in almost $2 million of debt. Suddenly pieces of my childhood started rearranging themselves in my head. The nights he disappeared for days. The mysterious phone calls. The constant moving after Mom died. All the things that never made sense before. "You lied to me," I whispered. My father looked away because he could not deny it. One of the men near the door shifted slightly, adjusting his coat while rain dripped onto the floorboards. Nobody interrupted. Nobody rushed. Damien Moretti stood there with the patience of someone completely certain the outcome already belonged to him. Then his gaze returned to the necklace again. "Your mother," he said slowly. "What was her name?" Something about the question unsettled me immediately. "Why? Answer me." Not loud, not threatening. Somehow worse because of how calm it was. "Elizabeth Bennet," I said quietly. Damien froze. Completely. The reaction lasted less than 2 seconds, but I saw it. So did the others. The massive man near the door glanced toward Damien with visible confusion. My father looked sick. Damien stared at me like the world had just tilted beneath his feet. Then he exhaled once and stepped closer. Not enough to touch me. Just enough that I caught the scent of rain and expensive cologne. "Elizabeth Bennet," he repeated softly. "Your mother used to wear this necklace too." My pulse stumbled. "How do you know that?" His jaw tightened slightly. The apartment went silent again. Then Damien said the last thing I expected to hear. "Because she saved my life once." The words did not make sense at first. My mind rejected them completely. Damien Moretti standing in our tiny apartment, saying my mother saved his life felt impossible, in the same way hurricanes or earthquakes probably felt impossible until they were directly in front of you. I stared at him while thunder rolled outside and rain tapped steadily against the windows. "You knew my mother?" I asked quietly. Damien looked at the necklace again before answering. "A long time ago." His voice had changed. Still controlled. Still calm. But there was something rougher underneath now. Something older. My father sank slowly into the kitchen chair like his legs had finally given out beneath him. "Damien," he muttered tiredly. "Leave Claire out of this." Damien's eyes shifted toward him instantly, the softness vanishing so fast it made my chest tighten. "You do not get to tell me what to do anymore, Marcus." Silence dropped heavily across the apartment again. The two men near the door remained perfectly still, watching everything without speaking. They looked less like bodyguards and more like wolves waiting for instructions from the only person they trusted. I crossed my arms tightly against the cold creeping through the room. "How did my mother know you?" Damien did not answer right away. He walked slowly toward the window instead, looking down at the rain-soaked street 3 floors below. Black SUVs lined the curb beneath glowing streetlights. Expensive, untouchable, completely out of place beside our crumbling building. "I was 17, he finally said. "Your mother found me during a snowstorm in Boston." My breath caught slightly. Boston. We had lived there before moving to New York after Mom died. I barely remembered it. Just pieces. Snow piled against sidewalks. A tiny apartment above a bakery. The smell of cinnamon drifting through old radiator heat. Damien continued quietly. "I had been in trouble. The kind of trouble boys survive only once if they are lucky." One of the men near the door lowered his eyes slightly, almost respectfully. I was bleeding. Cold. Angry at the world. "Your mother found me sitting behind a closed grocery store at 2 in the morning. I could picture it without meaning to. My mother had always brought home broken things. Injured birds. Stray cats. Lost people. She should have walked away," Damien said softly. "Most people would have." The kitchen light flickered overhead while thunder cracked somewhere in the distance. "But she sat beside me anyway. She gave me her scarf because I was freezing. Then she stayed until help came." I swallowed hard. That sounded exactly like my mother. She talked to me like I was still worth saving. His voice lowered slightly on the last word. Worth saving. Something inside my chest twisted unexpectedly. Because for the first time since he walked into the apartment, Damien Moretti no longer sounded dangerous. He sounded tired. My father rubbed shaking hands over his face. "Elizabeth never knew who you became," he said hoarsely. Damien turned slowly from the window. "That was intentional." "What does that mean?" I asked. He looked directly at me again. "Your mother once told me that people become monsters because the world convinces them they have no other choice." His gaze darkened slightly. I did not listen to her. The honesty in his voice unsettled me more than anger would have. Outside, headlights swept briefly across the apartment walls as another car passed through the storm below. Then Damien stepped closer to the kitchen table and placed both hands against the worn wood surface. "Your father owes me $1.8 million, he said calmly. "But Elizabeth Bennet once gave me something far more valuable than money." My father looked up slowly. Hope flickered across his exhausted face for the first time all night. Damien lifted one hand slightly, stopping him immediately. "Do not misunderstand me." The room chilled again instantly. "Your debt still exists." My stomach tightened. Then why are you here? I asked quietly. Damien looked at me for a long moment before answering. Because the second I saw you wearing that necklace, he said softly, everything changed. Nobody spoke after that. Rain continued sliding down the apartment windows while the old radiator hissed softly behind me, filling the silence with uneven heat that never quite reached the corners of the room. Damien Moretti stood near the kitchen table watching me with an expression I could not read, and somehow that unsettled me more than if he had threatened us. My father finally pushed himself upright from the chair, exhaustion dragging at every movement. Damien, he said carefully, Elizabeth would not want Claire involved in any of this. Damien's jaw tightened slightly at my mother's name. Elizabeth is the reason your daughter is still standing here untouched. My stomach twisted. Untouched, I repeated sharply. What exactly does that mean? The two men near the door exchanged quick glances before looking away again. Damien kept his eyes on me. It means other men would have handled this differently. The calm certainty in his voice chilled me instantly. I crossed my arms tighter over my sweater, trying to ignore how small the apartment suddenly felt with him inside it. So what happens now? I asked. Damien did not answer immediately. He walked slowly across the room, gaze drifting over faded wallpaper, cracked cabinets, unpaid bills stacked near the microwave. Nothing escaped his attention. Men like him probably survived by noticing everything. Finally, he stopped beside the tiny bookshelf near the couch. His fingers brushed lightly against an old framed photograph sitting there. My mother smiling beside me when I was maybe 8 years old. Snow falling around us. You look like her, he said quietly. I swallowed hard. Most people said I had my father's eyes. Hearing that from him felt strangely personal. Dangerous, even. My father stepped forward suddenly. I can pay some of it back, he said quickly. I just need more time. Damien turned slowly toward him. Whatever softness had existed seconds earlier disappeared instantly. You already had 6 years. Please. The words sounded broken coming from my father. I hated hearing it. Hated the humiliation filling the room. Damien studied him silently for several long seconds. Then he reached inside his suit jacket. My pulse jumped immediately, but he only pulled out a folded piece of paper and set it calmly on the kitchen table. Your remaining balance, he said. My father stared at the document without touching it. I cannot fix this overnight. No, Damien agreed softly. You cannot. Thunder cracked outside again, louder this time. Somewhere downstairs, a car alarm chirped briefly before falling silent. I looked between them, trying to understand what kind of world had just walked through our apartment door tonight. Because Damien Moretti did not act like the monsters people whispered about in movies or newspapers. He acted worse. Controlled. Patient. Like somebody who had already accepted darkness as part of himself years ago. Then his phone vibrated suddenly in his pocket. One of the men near the door straightened immediately. Damien glanced at the screen once before answering. Speak. His voice turned colder instantly. Professional. Dangerous. Whoever spoke on the other end talked fast enough that I could not understand anything clearly, but I saw the shift happen in Damien's face. His expression hardened. Completely. When? He asked sharply. Silence filled the apartment while he listened. Then his eyes moved directly to me. No, he said quietly into the phone. Nobody touches her. My heartbeat stumbled. The room suddenly felt very still again. Damien ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket without looking away from me. What happened? I asked carefully. One of the men near the door muttered something low in Italian under his breath. Damien ignored him. Your father's dead is no longer the only problem tonight, he said calmly. Fear crawled slowly up my spine. What does that mean? Damien stepped closer until only a few feet separated us. His voice lowered slightly when he answered. It means somebody else knows who you are now. The words settled over the apartment like smoke. Somebody else knows who you are now. My pulse thudded painfully against my ribs while rain hammered the windows hard enough to blur the city lights outside into streaks of gold and gray. I do not understand, I said quietly. Damien's expression did not change. You were seen leaving work tonight. So the people who watch me noticed you. Fear moved slowly through my chest, cold and heavy. Why would anyone care about me? Damien glanced briefly toward the men standing near the door before answering. Because enemies look for weaknesses. The sentence landed harder than I wanted it to. My father stood abruptly from the kitchen table. No, he said sharply. Claire has nothing to do with your world. Damien's eyes shifted toward him again, dark and unreadable. Your daughter became part of my world the second I walked through this door and recognized that necklace. Silence followed immediately after. My father looked sick. I felt worse. Somewhere downstairs, thunder rattled the old building while headlights swept briefly through the blinds again. Damien stepped closer to the table and picked up the unpaid electric bill lying near the microwave. His gaze moved across the overdue stamp before setting it back down carefully. You work at Rosie's diner, he said without looking at me. It was not a question. How do you know that? I know everything connected to tonight. The calm confidence in his voice should not have surprised me anymore, but somehow it still did. I hated how easily he controlled the room. Hated how the apartment that once felt small and safe now felt exposed under his attention. Nobody is coming after Claire, my father insisted again. Damien finally looked directly at him. You are not in a position to make promises. The truth of it cut through the room instantly. My father knew it too. He lowered his eyes without answering. Something inside me tightened painfully watching it happen. What exactly are you saying? I asked Damien quietly. That I am in danger? He held my gaze for several long seconds before answering. I am saying there are people who would use you to reach me. The honesty in his voice unsettled me because it did not sound manipulative. It sounded factual, like gravity, like storms. Just another reality he had already accepted. One of the men near the door suddenly touched the small device in his ear. Boss, he said carefully. Damien turned slightly toward him. What? Black sedan just circled the block twice. My father's face drained of color. The room instantly felt colder. Damien did not panic. He simply looked toward the rain-covered windows with narrowed eyes, every inch of him becoming sharper somehow. More alert. Dangerous in a quiet way that made my stomach tighten. How long? He asked. 3 minutes. Damien nodded once. Controlled. Calm. But I noticed his right hand flex slightly beside his leg like he was restraining something beneath the surface. Claire, my father whispered suddenly, voice shaking. Go pack a bag. I looked at him in disbelief. What? Do it now. No, the answer came faster this time. Stronger. I am not running away with strangers in the middle of the night. Damien looked at me then. Really looked at me. Not annoyed. Not angry. Almost impressed. Which somehow irritated me more. You think this is optional? He asked quietly. I think you walked into my apartment and started acting like you own my life. The two men near the door exchanged another quick glance. My father closed his eyes like he was waiting for disaster. But Damien only stepped closer until I could see rainwater still darkening the edge of his black shirt collar beneath the suit jacket. Claire, he said softly, if I wanted control over your life, this conversation would sound very different. My heartbeat stumbled once at the dangerous calm in his voice. Then another flash of lightning lit the apartment white for half a second. And downstairs, tires screeched suddenly against wet pavement. Everything happened at once after the tires screeched outside. One of the men near the door moved instantly toward the window while the other reached beneath his coat with sharp, controlled movements that made my pulse spike. My father grabbed the edge of the kitchen counter hard enough for his knuckles to whiten. Damien did not move at all. Somehow that frightened me more than panic would have. Rain streaked down the windows while headlights flashed across the ceiling again, brighter this time. Closer. Boss, the younger man near the window said quietly. Vehicle stopped outside. Damien's gaze never left mine. How many? Cannot tell yet. Thunder cracked overhead so loudly the apartment building seemed to shake around us. Somewhere down the hall, a baby started crying behind another apartment door. Normal life continuing inches away from whatever nightmare had just entered mine. Damien finally turned toward the window. Calm. Focused. Take Marcus to the back room. No, my father's voice came out sharper than I expected. I am not hiding while Claire. This is not a negotiation, Damien interrupted quietly. The room fell silent instantly. My father stopped talking because men like Damien Moretti clearly were not used to repeating themselves. I should have hated him for that. Maybe part of me already did. But another part noticed something else entirely. He had not once sounded afraid tonight. Not once. The younger man guided my father toward the hallway while Damien remained near the kitchen table watching the street below through the blinds. I crossed my arms tighter against myself, trying to steady the shaking in my hands. Who are these people? I asked softly. People who would enjoy embarrassing me. His voice stayed level, and hurting anyone connected to me in the process. The answer chilled me immediately. Connected to you? Damien glanced over his shoulder toward me then. Right now, yes. Before I could respond, somebody knocked downstairs. Loud. Aggressive. The sound echoed upward through the building stairwell. Another knock followed immediately after. Voices rose beneath the storm outside, muffled through rain and concrete walls. The man near the window stiffened slightly. 3 men entering the building. My pulse stumbled hard. Police. I whispered. No, Damien's answer came instantly. He reached inside his coat and removed something small and metallic before sliding it discreetly beneath the back of his waistband. The movement was smooth enough to make it obvious he had done it 1,000 times before. Fear crawled slowly up my spine. This was real. Whatever world Damien lived in had just followed him directly into ours. Another knock echoed from downstairs. Closer this time. The old staircase creaked beneath heavy footsteps moving upward floor by floor. My breathing turned shallow before I could stop it. Damien noticed immediately. Claire. His voice softened slightly. Look at me. I hated that I obeyed him automatically. His dark eyes held mine steadily while rain and thunder swallowed the city outside. You stay behind me no matter what happens. I am not going anywhere with you. The words came out weaker than I intended. Something almost amused flickered briefly across his face before disappearing again. You are stubborn. You are breaking into my apartment in the middle of the night. Fair point. The response startled me enough that I nearly forgot to breathe for half a second. Then another sound shattered the moment. Heavy footsteps stopping directly outside our apartment door. Silence followed. Thick. Heavy. Waiting. The younger man near the hallway moved closer to Damien immediately. Boss, he said under his breath. Damien nodded once without looking away from the door. Then somebody tested the doorknob slowly from the outside. My stomach dropped instantly. The lock rattled softly beneath unseen hands. Once. Twice. Then a voice drifted through the wood low enough to barely hear over the storm. Moretti. The man outside called calmly. We know you are in there. The voice outside the door sounded calm. That was the terrifying part. Calm men usually meant confident men. And confident men did not leave easily. Rain pounded against the apartment windows while the hallway outside fell completely silent again. Nobody moved. Nobody even breathed too loudly. Damien stood between me and the front door now without making it obvious, his broad shoulders blocking half the hallway light spilling across the floorboards. Open the door, Moretti, the voice called again. We only want to talk. One of Damien's men muttered something under his breath in Italian that I definitely did not need translated. Damien remained perfectly still. Take Claire to the back room, he said quietly. I said I am not hiding. My voice came out sharper than fear should have allowed. Damien glanced at me over his shoulder, dark eyes unreadable in the dim apartment light. You think this is bravery? He asked softly. No, this is bad timing. Before I could answer, the doorknob rattled again harder this time. My father appeared halfway down the hallway. Behind us, face pale beneath the flickering kitchen light. Claire, please. I hated hearing panic in his voice. Hated that everything tonight kept making him look smaller somehow. Damien finally stepped toward the door slowly. Controlled. Every movement precise. Stay behind me, he said without looking at me. Then he unlocked the deadbolt. My pulse nearly stopped. The door opened only a few inches at first. Cold rain-scented air rushed inside immediately. 3 men stood in the hallway outside beneath weak yellow ceiling lights. Expensive coats. Dark expressions. One of them smiled slightly when he saw Damien. There he is. Damien leaned casually against the doorframe like he was greeting business associates instead of men who had chased him through the city in the middle of a storm. You are far from your neighborhood, Victor. The man in front shrugged lightly. Mid-30s maybe. Blonde hair slicked neatly back. Expensive watch gleaming beneath the hallway light. He looked polished. Dangerous in the way wealthy men often did. Word travels fast tonight, Victor replied. You disappeared with your men. People became curious. Damien's voice stayed perfectly calm. Curiosity gets people buried. Victor smiled wider at that, though the expression never reached his eyes. Usually yes. His gaze shifted past Damien suddenly. Directly to me. Something cold slid down my spine instantly. So the rumors are true, he said softly. Damien moved slightly, blocking his view almost immediately. The motion was subtle but deliberate. Protective. Careful, Damien warned quietly. Victor raised both hands in fake innocence. Relax. I only came to see what could make Damien Moretti leave a debt unfinished for the first time in his life. My father stiffened behind me. The younger man beside Damien took one sharp step forward, but Damien stopped him with a single glance. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Rainwater dripped steadily from the hems of coats onto cracked hallway tile. Somewhere downstairs, thunder shook the building again. Then Victor looked at me one last time and smiled faintly. Your mother was beautiful too. Every muscle in my body locked instantly. Damien's entire expression changed. Not loudly, not dramatically, just colder than I had seen it all night. You do not say her name, Damien said quietly. Victor's smile faded slightly. For the first time since opening the door, tension filled the hallway thick enough to feel. Even I understood some invisible line had just been crossed. Then Victor exhaled once and stepped backward. Easy, Moretti. We are all businessmen here. Damien said nothing. Victor adjusted the sleeve of his coat slowly before turning toward the stairs. This city watches everything, he said over his shoulder. Especially when powerful men start making emotional decisions. The three men disappeared down the stairwell moments later, footsteps fading beneath thunder and rain. Damien remained standing in the doorway long after they left. Still, silent, dangerous. Then finally he closed the door softly behind him and locked it again. When he turned back toward me, something had changed in his eyes. Not fear, determination. You are not staying here tonight, he said. The apartment seemed smaller after that. Smaller and colder and impossible to return to normal. Rain hammered the windows while silence stretched between all of us like something fragile ready to snap. Damien stood near the door watching me carefully, his dark coat still damp from the storm outside. No, I said immediately. I am not leaving with you. My father looked exhausted. Claire, no. I shook my head harder this time. You do not get to decide that for me. Damien's expression barely changed. Somehow that calm control only irritated me more. You think staying here is safer? I think following a man like you into some unknown place sounds insane. One corner of his mouth almost moved. Not quite a smile. More like he respected the answer. Fair enough. Then he stepped toward the kitchen counter and picked up my diner apron where I had dropped it earlier. His eyes moved briefly over the stitched Rosie's logo before setting it down again. You worked a double shift tonight. I frowned slightly. Why do you keep noticing things like that? Because details keep people alive. The answer came too quickly to be rehearsed. It was simply truth to him. My father sat heavily in the kitchen chair again, rubbing both hands over his tired face. Claire, he said quietly, please listen to him. Hearing my father say that nearly broke something inside me. He sounded defeated. Completely defeated. Damien looked toward him briefly before returning his attention to me. Victor was not bluffing downstairs, he said. The second men like him become curious, your life changes. Because of you. Yes. At least he did not lie about it. Thunder cracked outside again, while headlights flashed briefly across the apartment ceiling. Somewhere deep down, I knew things had already changed the second Damien walked through our front door tonight. Maybe even before that. Where would you even take me? I asked quietly. Somewhere secure. That sounds comforting. It is not meant to be comforting. The honesty in his voice caught me off guard again. Damien Moretti did not waste words trying to charm people. He spoke like a man too used to reality to bother decorating it. One of his men stepped forward from near the hallway. Boss, weather is getting worse. Damien nodded once without looking away from me. 5 minutes. The man disappeared back toward the front door immediately. I crossed my arms tighter against myself and glanced around the apartment. The peeling wallpaper. The tiny kitchen table. The old photograph of my mother still sitting near the bookshelf. Everything suddenly looked temporary. Fragile. If I leave, I said carefully, my father comes too. Damien's jaw tightened almost invisibly. No, then I am not going. Claire, my father whispered. Dad, I am not abandoning you. Pain crossed his face so fast it nearly hurt to see. You are not abandoning me. How do you know? His eyes filled with something close to shame. Because I already failed you long before tonight. Silence swallowed the room again. Rain rolled steadily down the windows while thunder echoed somewhere far across the city. Damien watched both of us quietly, unreadable as always. Then he walked toward the bookshelf again and picked up the framed photograph of my mother. He stared at it for several long seconds before speaking. Your mother once spent 3 hours in freezing weather talking a frightened 17-year-old boy into getting medical help instead of dying alone in an alley. His voice lowered slightly. She told me surviving mattered even when life became ugly. I swallowed hard. Damien looked directly at me then. Elizabeth Bennet saved me because she believed good people should protect others when they can. His dark eyes held mine steadily. Tonight, Claire, I am trying to return the favor. Before I could answer, the lights flickered suddenly across the entire apartment. Once, twice, then everything went dark. Darkness swallowed the apartment so completely that for half a second nobody moved. Rain hammered outside while the old refrigerator died, with a low mechanical groan somewhere behind me. My heartbeat slammed painfully against my ribs. Then the hallway emergency lights flickered faintly beneath the apartment door, casting weak yellow shadows across the floor. Stay calm, Damien said quietly. Calm. Like losing power in the middle of a storm while dangerous men circled the building was somehow normal to him. One of his men moved instantly toward the window again. Whole block is out, he muttered. My father swore softly under his breath from the kitchen table. I wrapped my arms tighter around myself, trying to ignore how exposed the apartment suddenly felt without lights. The city outside looked different too. Harsher. Lightning flashed briefly through the rain-covered windows, illuminating Damien's face for one sharp second before darkness swallowed him again. Was that them? I whispered. Damien looked toward the window. Maybe. The answer did not help. Somewhere downstairs, a car door slammed hard enough to echo through the building stairwell. Then voices drifted upward through the darkness below. Too muffled to understand. Damien's attention sharpened instantly. We leave now, he said. Absolutely not. My voice shook despite my effort to control it. Claire, my father said quietly, please. I turned toward him, barely able to see his face in the dark apartment. You want me to walk into some unknown place with people carrying guns? One of Damien's men shifted uncomfortably near the hallway. Damien himself remained perfectly composed. You keep saying guns like they are the most dangerous thing in this city. Lightning flashed again outside, bright enough to reveal his expression clearly for half a second. Tired, focused, completely serious. Fear makes people predictable, he said softly. Predictable people do not survive long around men like Victor. Another loud sound echoed from downstairs. Not shouting, not fighting, just the heavy metallic slam of the building entrance opening again. More footsteps followed immediately after. Faster this time. Coming upward. My pulse stumbled hard. Damien turned toward the hallway. How many? At least 4. The younger man answered quietly after listening near the door. My father stood abruptly from the table. Take Claire. The words hit me like ice water. Dad, listen to me. His voice cracked slightly in the darkness. Your mother spent her whole life protecting people. If Elizabeth were here tonight, she would tell you to leave. Pain tightened painfully in my throat before I could stop it. Damien stepped closer then, close enough that I could smell rain and cold air clinging to his coat. You have 60 seconds, he said quietly. After that, I make the decision for you. I looked up at him immediately. You do not get to control me. No, he agreed softly. But I do get to keep you alive. The honesty in his voice stole the argument from me for one terrible second. Another flash of lightning lit the apartment white again. This time I noticed something I had missed before. Damien was standing slightly in front of me without even realizing it, shielding me instinctively from the door. Like protecting people had become automatic around danger. Somewhere in the hallway outside, floorboards creaked. Closer now. The younger man near the door stepped back quickly. Boss. Damien's entire focus sharpened instantly. Move. Everything happened fast after that. One of the men grabbed my coat from the kitchen chair while Damien reached for my wrist. Warm fingers closing carefully but firmly around my hand. Not painful, just certain. Wait, I whispered, panic rising hard in my chest. I cannot just leave my father here. Damien's gaze locked onto mine in the darkness. Claire, he said quietly, if you stay, they stop seeing you as innocent. Then somebody started pounding on the apartment door. The pounding on the apartment door shook the entire frame hard enough to rattle dishes inside the kitchen cabinets. My pulse slammed against my ribs while thunder rolled outside like the city itself was breaking apart around us. Damien, a voice shouted from the hallway. Open the door. Damien did not react to the yelling. His grip tightened slightly around my wrist instead. Steady. Controlled. Back exit, he said quietly to his men. Everything moved instantly after that. The younger man disappeared toward the kitchen while the larger one positioned himself near the front door, silent and alert. My father stepped directly in front of me before Damien could pull me away. Wait. His voice shook. I need 1 minute with her. Damien studied him for a long second in the darkness. Another violent bang slammed against the apartment door. You have 30 seconds, Damien said finally. Then he released my wrist and stepped back. My father grabbed both my hands immediately. His palms felt ice cold. Claire, listen to me carefully. Dad, what is happening? I whispered. Who are these people? Pain crossed his face so openly it almost frightened me more than the storm outside. Years ago, he said quietly, after your mother died, I made terrible choices. Another bang hit the door. Louder this time. Wood cracked somewhere near the lock. My father flinched but kept talking. I borrowed money trying to save my construction company. Then I borrowed more trying to fix the first mistake. Tears burned unexpectedly behind my eyes. Why did you never tell me? Because your mother spent her whole life protecting you from ugly things. His voice broke slightly, and I failed at protecting anything. I shook my head immediately. Dad? No, he squeezed my hands tighter. You need to hear this. Behind us, Damien watched silently near the hallway. Lightning flashed through the apartment windows, illuminating his face for one sharp second before darkness swallowed him again. Calm, focused, waiting. Your mother knew Damien before any of this, my father whispered. Back when he was still just a scared kid trying to survive. My stomach tightened. How? Elizabeth volunteered at shelters in Boston during winter storms. That is where she found him. Another loud crack splintered through the apartment door. One hinge bent inward slightly. My breathing turned shallow instantly. Marcus, Damien warned quietly. My father ignored him. Claire, your mother believed people could change if somebody gave them kindness at the right moment. He glanced briefly toward Damien. I think part of him still remembers that because of her. Hearing my father speak about Damien Moretti like he was human instead of dangerous unsettled me more than I wanted to admit. Why are they after him? I whispered. My father lowered his voice further. Because powerful men become targets the second they care about something. The sentence landed heavily between us. Another violent slam hit the apartment door, this time with splintered visibly beneath the handle. One of Damien's men moved instantly toward the hallway. Boss. Damien nodded once. Then he looked directly at me. Time is up. My father stepped closer suddenly and pressed something small into my hand. Cold metal. I looked down briefly. A silver key attached to an old snowflake keychain. Your mother kept a storage unit in Queens, he whispered urgently. She told me if anything ever happened, you would find answers there. Confusion hit me instantly. Answers about what? But my father shook his head. I do not know. Elizabeth never told me everything. Fear twisted painfully through my chest. Outside the apartment, angry voices rose in the hallway while another impact cracked against the weakening door. Damien stepped forward then, dark eyes fixed entirely on me. Claire, he said softly, either you trust me now, or those men decide what happens next. Before I could answer, the apartment door finally burst inward. The sound of the door breaking inward exploded through the apartment like thunder. Wood splintered across the floor while cold rain filled air. Rushed into the hallway. I jumped backward instinctively, the silver key still clenched tightly in my hand. 3 dark figures pushed into the apartment through the shattered doorway, silhouettes against flashing lightning from the stairwell behind them. Everything became noise and movement all at once. My father grabbed my shoulders hard enough to make me stumble behind him while Damien moved faster than anyone else in the room. 1 second, he stood near the hallway. The next, he was directly between me and the broken door, every part of him sharp with controlled focus. Enough, Damien said coldly. The single word cut through the chaos instantly. Even the men forcing their way inside hesitated for half a second. Long enough for me to see Victor step through the ruined doorway behind them, rain dripping from the collar of his dark coat. This is becoming dramatic, Victor said with a faint smile. Damien did not move. You broke into a private home. You disappeared with unfinished business. Victor's eyes shifted briefly toward me again. People became curious. My pulse pounded painfully while thunder rolled overhead. Damien's men had positioned themselves instantly around the apartment, creating space between me and the intruders without a single wasted movement. The tension inside the room felt suffocating now. Heavy. Dangerous. Victor glanced around the tiny apartment with visible amusement. All this over a waitress from Brooklyn? The sentence barely left his mouth before Damien stepped forward once. Calmly. But the air changed immediately. Watch your tone, Damien said quietly. Victor raised one eyebrow slightly. Interesting. Rainwater dripped steadily from the broken doorway onto cracked hardwood floors while lightning flashed through the apartment windows again. My father stood beside me, breathing hard, eyes fixed on Victor with open fear. I realized then that he was not afraid for himself anymore. He was afraid for me. Victor finally sighed softly. Relax, Moretti. Nobody is here to hurt the girl. Damien's voice turned even colder somehow. You do not say her name. You do not look at her. And you do not come near her again. The silence after that felt enormous. Even Victor's men exchanged quick, uneasy glances. Because Damien no longer sounded like a businessman protecting leverage. He sounded personal, possessive in a way that frightened even me a little. Victor studied him carefully for several long seconds before smiling faintly again. You care about her already. Damien said nothing, which somehow answered the question anyway. My heartbeat stumbled once at the realization. Victor noticed it too. That is dangerous, Damien. For who? Damien asked softly. Lightning flashed again outside. Victor's smile faded slightly at whatever he saw in Damien's face. Then one of Victor's men leaned toward him and whispered something quickly under his breath. Victor's expression shifted immediately. Annoyance. Police are 2 blocks away, the man muttered. Damien did not even blink. Victor exhaled sharply through his nose before looking toward me one last time. This city destroys people who stand too close to powerful men, he said calmly. Ask your father. My stomach twisted painfully. Before I could respond, Damien stepped slightly closer to me again, blocking Victor's view completely. Leave, Damien ordered quietly. For 1/10 second I thought Victor might refuse. Then he adjusted the sleeve of his coat and nodded once. Another night then. He turned toward the broken doorway slowly, his men following immediately behind him into the storm-dark hallway outside. The apartment fell silent except for rain and my uneven breathing. Damien remained standing in front of me long after Victor disappeared. Still tense, still alert. Then finally he turned toward me, dark eyes softer than I had seen them all night. Are you hurt? He asked quietly. I stared at him in disbelief for half a second. After everything that just happened, that was the first thing he asked me. Rain continued pouring through the broken apartment doorway long after Victor disappeared into the storm. Cold air drifted across the floorboards while thunder echoed somewhere far above the city skyline. Nobody spoke at first. My father sat heavily against the kitchen counter like the last hour had drained whatever strength he had left. Damien still stood directly in front of me, dark eyes searching my face carefully. Are you hurt? He repeated quietly. I swallowed hard before answering. No, his shoulders relaxed slightly. Just slightly. But I noticed it anyway. One of his men moved toward the ruined front door to check the hallway while the other disappeared into the kitchen, speaking rapidly into a phone in Italian. The apartment no longer felt like home. It felt temporary now. Broken open. Exposed to a world I never wanted near us. Damien finally stepped back enough to give me space. We leave in 2 minutes. I looked toward my father immediately. Dad comes with us. Damien's jaw tightened. Claire, no, I shook my head. I am not leaving him here alone after tonight. My father looked exhausted beyond words. Sweetheart, listen to me. I have listened all night. Tears burned painfully behind my eyes. And every answer somehow makes things worse. Silence settled heavily between us again. Rain tapped steadily against broken wood near the doorway while lightning flashed across the apartment windows. Damien glanced toward my father before speaking quietly. There is a secure location in Queens. My father looked up immediately. You would take both of us. Damien's gaze shifted back toward me. I would take her anywhere she needs to feel safe. The answer hit me harder than it should have. Because he said it without hesitation. Like protecting me had already become automatic somewhere along the way tonight. I looked away first. My pulse felt uneven suddenly. My father slowly rubbed both hands over his face again before speaking quietly into the silence. Elizabeth would hate this. Damien's expression changed instantly at my mother's name. Softer. Sadder somehow. Your wife spent her life believing damaged people deserved another chance. My father let out one tired laugh beneath his breath. She married me, did not she? For the first time all night, something close to an actual smile touched Damien's face. Brief. Gone almost immediately. But real. She used to say kindness was the only thing strong enough to interrupt fate. The sentence lingered in the apartment quietly after he spoke it. Outside, sirens wailed faintly somewhere across the city while rain continued flooding the streets below. I looked down at the small silver key still clenched tightly in my hand. What if my mother left something important in that storage unit? I asked softly. Damien's eyes dropped briefly toward the key. Then we find it. Simple. Certain. Like he already considered the problem his responsibility too. My father straightened slowly from the counter. Claire, he said carefully, there are things about your mother you still do not know. Fear tightened inside my chest again. Like what? But before he could answer, Damien's phone vibrated sharply in his pocket. He glanced at the screen once, and his entire expression hardened immediately. We have to move now. One of his men appeared near the hallway. Cars are ready. Damien nodded once before looking back at me. You can hate me tomorrow, he said quietly. Tonight, just stay close to me. I should have argued again. I should have refused. But the storm outside had already changed everything. My apartment door hung broken from its hinges. Dangerous men knew my name now. And somehow the only person standing between me and that darkness was the man my mother once saved in a snowstorm years ago. Damien stepped closer slowly, holding out his hand toward me while thunder rolled across the city one final time. Come with me, Claire. For one terrifying second, it felt less like a request and more like the moment my entire life split into before and